what the DNA we really want is the killer's DNA. Why don't we have it? Because these remains were so well hidden for so long that they're mostly skeletonized. There's no trace of DNA left. The clothing has been out in the weather and the rain and the snow for 10, maybe 15 years.
Right.
Actually more, like what would it be in 2020? And we started
one was 17 years.
Yeah.
With Miss Mack, I think, with Valerie Mack. She
Yeah,
was
and
killed
then
in, I think, 1997, or went missing in
right. And we have one from 1996. So that's 24 years. 24 years this guy's been operating.
Which means he could very well could be close to 60 years old.
That's right. He
Right?
could be. Yeah.
You know, Bob, can I just stop you for 1 second because you brought up the whole DNA thing? They just had a press conference recently with Geraldine Hart, who was the FBI agent who's now the Suffolk County Police Commissioner since 2018. And
Yes.
the New York Times had a story, and they acted as if there was brand new smoking gun evidence, which there really isn't. And one of the things that they made public was a belt.
Yeah.
And the belt had letters HM or WH on it. And they had this, of course, for years, but they just didn't release it to the public. And where it was found, or on, it could have been around someone's neck, we don't know. But their feelings are that the killer may have touched this. But if there was DNA, that's an item that possibly it could have been on. But you don't know also how long was that out in the elements, right?
Yeah.
But they were hoping, I guess, that someone would identify the HM or the WH letters, which they probably should have released a long time ago.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah.
DNA is almost miraculous. From the part of the reason that New York City has the largest and most advanced DNA laboratory in the country is because of 9/11.
Right.
9/11 did nothing good for anyone except for DNA. It advanced the technology by about 2 or 3 generations because we were working with items like a bone fragment that weighed less than a gram and had laid on top of the Deutsche Bank for 10 years in the wind and rain and snow. And yet we were still able to get a profile from it. So the methodologies developed in that time have made that lab just so incredibly advanced.
Is that, Bob, are you using the PCR method, the polymerase chain reaction? Is that replicates a small amount of DNA and makes it larger?
The low copy DNA or high sensitivity or low copy they used for many, many years. They stopped using that recently. I don't know if it's a PCR or an STS or whatever. I'm not a DNA scientist.
Right.
But they developed methodologies that used as few as 6 skin cells to come up with a profile. Now, they stopped using that for regular work maybe a year or 2 ago, only because the DNA testing was so incredibly sensitive that it picked up lots and lots of mixtures. Most items have been touched by at least 5 people.
Right.
And they were getting so many mixtures that it was hard to separate who was the predominant contact onto that item, that weapon, gun, whatever. So I don't know.
Defense attorneys love to know all of that stuff to be able
yeah.
to. Although, something, when we watched the cross-examination in the OJ case, the jury was sleeping. They spent so much time with the scientist who was talking about DNA, the jury just went to sleep.
Yeah, it is. It can be incredibly boring, except when it's used for something like this.
Yeah.
It's our best tool ever. So I have no doubt that using familial searching, using genetic genealogy, and using the high sensitivity methods, we will eventually identify all of the victims. Right now we have 6 out of the 10 or 11 people. So why haven't they been identified to date? I don't know. Is Suffolk County, did they have a moratorium on it? Are they working with another lab, an outside lab, a New York lab, the Suffolk lab? I don't really know.
Well, but the FBI, and Barbara, you could also talk about how in the beginning of this investigation,
Yeah,
there was a lot of problems where there was corruption. There was that Chief Burke that many people thought was a suspect,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Spoda, who was I think the district attorney out there, he also wound up getting in trouble over this.
yep,
And then they had the former police commissioner Dorner, I think his name was. He didn't seem like he really knew how to run an investigation like this, you know.
yeah.
He
Well,
just,
maybe we should open up that little elephant in the room. Why, in the beginning, was there so little progress on this case? Why was Shannon Gilbert not chased down? Why wasn't it investigated fully when she disappeared? And Chief Burks, or Commissioner Burks at the time, yeah, he was a troubled kind of guy. He was eventually indicted, arrested, and convicted of interfering in an investigation, in brutality of a suspect, assault, et cetera, et cetera. He served, I think, 4 years, 48 months in federal prison.
I think he got his pension though.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Unbelievable. You know, you wear that white shirt, you get your pension. You wear a blue shirt, you go away in handcuffs behind your back, and you get nothing.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
But you know, let's just call it what it is. When this first happened, there was an attitude, I think, of well, it's just a hooker.
Because these were prostitutes.
Right. These girls, she was drugged, she ran away. You know, she's just a crazed prostitute, druggie. Let's not throw all of our assets and resources after this one. But then when they found the other girls, you know, and I know that if you've got the investigative mindset, nothing stops you.
Right.
You can't let a mystery like this go by.
It had to be a full court press 24/7, 365, you know?
Yeah, yeah. And that just never happened. And we're not sure. Well, I mean, maybe it was just the attitude of, well, it's only prostitutes, and this is going to be a difficult one since they're not identifiable and they've been laying out in the rain and the snow for, their skeletons have been there for 10, 15 years.
You know, Barbara, I'm not going to lie. I don't want to put down Suffolk County homicide investigations.
No.
I'm sure they do a great job, but
Yeah.
they don't have the amount of murders every year that, like, for example, New York City would get.
Right.
And because you get
experience.
so many murders, you get better at it. Practice makes perfect, as they say, you know?
Sure.
So, and I don't doubt Suffolk probably has some fantastic homicide investigators, but, you know, from what I see in New York City, you know, like the homicide squads in New York City were the premier units of any investigative unit on the whole NYPD, you know?
Yeah.
I would see
or of
units,
the country even.
all over the country. Yeah, I would see other units from the New York City Police Department that were the elite so-and-so, and I won't mention any names because I'll get hate mail, but they would come and work on a case with us and they would be like, holy shit. They, you know, and they were impressed, you know, and I was proud to work in that unit with such great detectives. But it's true. The more you work on murders, the more skills you get interviewing people, interrogating people, collecting evidence, having seen something before, you know what to do and how it's done, you know, and again, I'm sure Suffolk has some great investigators, but they also in the beginning didn't request the FBI.
That's right.
And for, you know, something just for their money alone, you should bring them in. And the toys they bring to the investigation. Bring in the FBI. We need their money. You know, we need their overtime money. You know?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I have no doubt that there's some very talented and dedicated homicide investigators in Suffolk County, but it feels like from the top down, there was not a lot of resources and priority thrown at this case. That's
in the beginning.
feeling.
Yeah, you're right. You're
in the beginning.
You're right. Yeah.
So,
well, the one author who just wrote that New York Times article, he had wrote that book, Lost Girls. and
Yeah.
they had made a Netflix special on it, and they sort of that was the whole narrative. The police don't care because they're prostitutes, you know.
Yeah.
And so he sort of, when he wrote that New York Times article, as if there was a smoking gun in this new Geraldine Hart, how now has this case? It's going to be solved in a few weeks, you know. And it's so untrue. The headline led you to believe that, oh, you have new information, you know.
Yeah.
And there was no new information other than Miss Mack being identified. That was the only new information they had. The belt they had that belt for years.
Yeah, yeah.
Right?
You're right. There's no substitute for experience. And, you know, the NYPD not only has some of the most experienced detectives in the country, but the crime scene unit in New York
Amazing.
City.
They're great.
Absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
The whole forensic section for NYPD is really stellar.
Well, you know, some police departments don't have a separate unit that does crime scene. The detective just puts on his crime scene hat and processes the scene. You know, think about how distracting and how much work that is, right?
Yeah, yeah. You know, we've had some of the greats, you know, John Palucci and Hal Sherman and Eddie and God,
Matt Steiner.
Yeah.
Matt Steiner's great, you know.
You know,
all
these
people,
are
legends. I'm
legends.
gonna tell them they're gonna send me some money for mentioning their names.
Yeah, these guys are legends, you know, and I would like to see people with that kind of experience. Why not call them in? Why not help out? But yeah, about the FBI, yes. So early on, the FBI did join in the search, but they were not officially invited to be part of the investigation.
Right.
After Chief Burks left, and after Geraldine Hart was named commissioner, now they're back in officially. So they bring a lot of resources to bear, especially in DNA and you know, they have the ability to throw some more money at this.
Right, and they have national connections.
National connections.
They need that for whatever reason. They can pick up the phone and call someone in Los Angeles or someone in Butte, Iowa, and they're connected right away. Whereas local police department can't do that.
Yeah. So we don't have the killer's DNA, but we do have some DNA from some of the victims. And why is it so important that we identify them? Well, because when you know who a person is and what their life is, you know who they were associated with. Yes. And that's why we can now go back and like Valerie Mack having been just identified in May of this year. Now you can go to her family. Who was she seeing? Who were her friends? What escort services did she work with?
Right.
And that, back then, I actually did call the Suffolk County Police Department. I called the detectives there because I had some information that I thought was interesting, and I still do. And that is that one of the victims found was a male, an Asian male in women's clothing. So, a transgender person. He was not killed like the others. Different method, and the kind of thing that makes you think that the guy that hired him as an escort did not know that he was a male. And then when he found out, he got really angry and killed him in a specific way. So
is it out there how he was killed, or you don't want that?
I don't know. I don't know if it's out there. So actually, let's see. We can find out right now.
I think you did write on your notes that you sent me that he was killed a certain way. I don't want to say it. You don't want to say it.
Yes. Okay. Let's just say blunt trauma. Okay. Not strangulation, blunt trauma.
Now, Barbara, were all the other victims definitively killed through strangulation?
We don't know.
You don't know.
We don't know because...
Is that an assumption, or is there any scientific evidence that they were strangled?
I recall one mention of the hyoid bone being injured on a victim. I
think that was what Shannon Gilbert with Dr. Bodden suggested.
Probably, yeah. Yeah, because she was the freshest. Now, the hyoid bone is a little tiny thing, and it's very delicate. And we do have some evidence of scattering of these remains. You know, animals in the brush can scatter the remains. It's really hard to say. In the absence of flesh, in the absence of being able to see hemorrhages in the strap muscles of the neck, injury to the hyoid bone or the thyroid cartilage, if all those things are gone, you can't say strangulation. But there was mention of it. Let's put it that way.
Right.
So now we have this male, probably transgender person, probably living as a female. He had some very interesting findings in his skeleton that made it obvious that he had an unusual walk, that he probably had pain in his joints, probably was losing teeth because of this certain bone disease he had. And I'm saying he because I don't know if he identified as female.
Right.
So we could
This
say
was
they.
before they were even considering that anyway.
Right, right. You know, before we had.
You could speak that way because it goes back to 10 years ago.
Right. Before we had
before we all became woke.
Right. Before we had an acceptable terminology.
Yes, yes.
So this male body had this unusual bone disease, pretty rare, the kind of thing that you would go to a doctor for. Now, we have a very good sketch, a composite sketch of this male person. We have some DNA. We have the knowledge that he lived as a woman or was transgender. And we have the knowledge that he had this bone disease. Now, my thought was, back then, there were only a few clinics that were treating transgender people, giving them hormones, doing their health care. I can think of 2 or 3. Why not go right to those clinics and say, hey, do you know anybody that looks like this? Asian male, transgender, with an unusual walk, missing teeth, and a bone disease.
No, Barbara, you're 100% right. We had a case where a transgender guy killed his roommate, and we found a transgender employment agency. We were like, that would have existed, you know?
Yeah, this is the kind of stuff you have to do. Yeah. So when I saw these reports of the bone disease, this was from the anthropology group at the medical examiner's office in New York. I called the detectives out there and said, look, you know, you may have already thought of this, but here are the 3 clinics treating transgender people in New York City. And, you know, you may want to check them out. And the response I got was very, thanks a lot, honey. Yeah, that sounds good. Thanks. Yeah. And I said, no, this is Barbara Butcher from the New York City Medical Examiner's Office. I know you guys. Listen, just trust me on this.
They like, no, that's great. Like you were like someone reading crime novels.
Right. Like I was just, you know, average Joe citizen, Josephine citizen calling in saying, oh my goodness, I thought of something interesting. I mean, I was looking at the reports that told me what disease this was. And, you know, maybe they did follow it up. I don't really know. Yeah. I mean, there's so much we don't know about this investigation. Now,
well, we don't know anything about the, you know, when you talk about the victimology, like you were discussing before. Now we get the victim identified. Let's go find out about her life. Let's interview her family. Let's interview her boyfriends. Let's see if she owned a car. Let's look at her financial records. Let's look at everything about her sexuality. Let's look at who she hung with. That's sometimes the answers in a murder case come from that, you know, and the victimology is so important. But right, and you're giving them a path to the victimology. That's why identifying in a homicide investigation, identifying a victim is probably the #1 most important thing right in the beginning of the case.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, you know, you notice these girls were, like, at least the first 4 girls were all very petite, little petite brunettes. They all escorts, all come out of New York. Some were staying out in Babylon. at a motel near there. And maybe she had a lot of clients in the area. I don't know. Right. Somebody has to know these girls.
And that goes back also to MO and to signatures, that who does this serial killer prefer? What he's looking for, small, petite, white girl with short brown hair, who advertises on Craigslist. You know, all of those things are important in putting a pattern together on who is this guy,
Yeah.
Although, I lost a lot of confidence years ago with the FBI's profiling unit after the Beltway sniper. They were so far off, as like, I could have made a better prediction than they did, Yeah. The guy you're looking for is a male white, who's 35 years old, probably works in an office, and it turns out the shooter's 17, a male black, and he's with his stepfather, who's a male black, 35. So
yeah,
I don't have a lot of faith in the FBI's behavioral, identification profilers, because I don't know what they're working on that can make them make a prediction like that was so off the wall.
Yeah. Well, your predictions are only as good as your information. And I mean, in this case, we don't have all that much information to go on, except the victimology of the type of girl. So I'm assuming that Suffolk County detectives were able to go to the escort services in town and say, you got a John who prefers petite brunettes and, is out in Suffolk County. Were they able to do that? Did they have the manpower? As far as I know, they did not call in NYPD and ask for any help, which would have been, I don't know, would that have been?
Would probably have been thrilled to help.
Exactly. We're all thrilled to jump in and help any place in the country, any place in the world. It's part of the investigative personality, right?
Absolutely. I mean, just to say, I worked on the Gilgo serial killer,
Sure.
I'm going to put up a shingle on my door when I retire as a PI,
Yeah. Yeah. And we all have.
I did a podcast once with Barbara Butcher and worked on the Gilgo serial killer, Barbara, there's not just one, but there's another thing that I thought that I didn't know anything about, and it's in your notes. And there's a guy named John Bitterolf. Is that how you pronounce it?
John Bitterolf, yeah.
2, possibly 3 prostitutes, and he was convicted in 2017. He lived in Manorville, and one of the victims was best friends with a Gilgo victim. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. That's a really strange one. Now, it's John Bitterolf. So he kills maybe 3 prostitutes, and he's linked by DNA, which is identified because his brother was convicted of a crime and had to give DNA, and there was a link.
So the familial DNA hit once again.
Yes, once again.
One that the ACLU is trying to get us never to use. It hit. It worked once again.
So so John Bitterolf, he lived in Manorville, and one of the victim's mothers said that her daughter got a lot of calls before she was killed from Manorville. In addition, one of his victims, I think her name was Tancredi, her daughter was best friends with, who was it, Barthelme?
Melissa Barthelme?
Yeah, she was, so the daughter of one of Bertroff's victims was best friends with another victim, one of the Gilgo Beach victims. So
is there any way he could be the guy?
Well, Suffolk County Police did look into that possibility, but the guy's attorney denied his involvement. Wow, what a surprise. Oh, okay.
He's a good guy. He only killed 3.
Yeah, he didn't kill these girls. He only killed those girls.
Well, without being allowed to speak of them, minus any other evidence. There's no DNA.
Right.
There's no physical evidence. He could be the guy, couldn't he?
He could. I mean, have the killings stopped? He's in jail. I don't see, I haven't heard of any other killings. But then we have another suspect.